This is Damien, the quite rational gaming dad, and this is thoughts and comments on Call of Duty World War II. The gaming world will never run out of Nazis to kill. Wolfenstein have made half a dozen titles out of the one concept. Medal of Honor likewise, and now Call of Duty, who started in World War II, have returned to the scene. Let's get philosophical for a moment and ask, why is this? In my estimation, there must be something about the World War II narrative that speaks to our moral capacity and desire that we just don't feel compunction when shooting Nazis. Is it because we feel we are doing a moral duty to stave off impending evil, which then licenses game developers to come up with new ways to depict the conflict and provide an immersive experience? Let's not forget, there are, however, definitely tales of heroism and bravery to be told, and this is something that should not be forgotten or overlooked, regardless of if you are a military buff or an anti-war protester. The facts of the matter are, in that World War II, the world was at war, and people who thought they were doing the greater good risked their lives to win battles mapped out by people whose sons would never need to hold a gun. Just as an aside, are there any games from the Nazi side of the equation? Are there any games involving the Russian-German conflicts? This side of the conflict was just as vital to winning World War II. And it's not like the Allies were not beneath committing war crimes themselves. One thing I will comment on is the graphic realism of the game, where you see heads blown up, legs sheared off, and blood sprayed everywhere, which I think is commendable. For me, despite never having been to war, even I can see that war is hell. In war, I think you really only have 4 exits: injury, death, glorious victory, or humiliating retreat. I'm glad to see that human rights atrocities are included in this game, and even in some cases highlighted. But the first taste we get is briefly seeing a pair of French people who have been hung from a tree, with an NPC astonishingly commenting, "These were civilians." But that part was actually easy to miss, because in the first time I played that mission, I only got the auto-triggered dialogue and whizzed right past the people they were talking about. Luckily, I understood from the context that they were talking about civilians. Later in the game, you see bodies of people who are clearly civilians lying in pools of blood, but it is entirely possible for your character to walk on top of these dead civilians, whose death was seemingly just as brutal and callous as those that your comrades had commented on earlier. I like to see a game where it dissuades you from walking on top of dead people, either by blocking the game world or by the main character you're controlling showing some remorse. But let's have a think for a moment. Were the Allies just as worried about the rules of war as what we in the West want them to be? Think about it. One of the other things I like about this game is the story of Zussman being taken to camp and interacting with his captors, which I think is a great addition. He realises that he isn't going to be treated kindly, but is defiant, and the details of his sunken face and emaciated body by the time you rescue him are striking. I would like to see a similar kind of game to this with just as much detail, where you have multiple endings and paths forward. Let's say you get into the chase for Zussman and you actually do manage to rescue him. Let's say you fail at a critical part in the battle at the bridge across the Rhine, and while you may complete the mission overall, you miss the opportunity to get to the camp where Zussman is being held. One thing that ruins the game for me, and in general, is the obsession with finding extras. In this case, they're called mementos, which distracts from the game at hand. On one hand, you're jumping on machine guns to massacre an onslaught of Nazi grunts. Then, on the other, you're scouring rooms of Nazi infrastructure looking for little in-game extras that add nothing. I would like to see a version of the game where maybe the first time around there are no extras. Then when you complete the game, all the little extras open up for you to look around and find. The next question I have is, were all high-ranking Nazi officers psychotic killers? In the Russo undercover mission, spoilers, the high-ranking officer whose office you are infiltrating just happens to be the one who personally murdered your son. And he realises it, and he relishes in that fact. Yes, the Nazi regime on the whole was not focused on reason and rationality, but was every officer happy to slaughter people on a whim? Of this, I'm not convinced. Yes, the leadership condoned such activity, but were they all murderous on a personal level? As a game, Call of Duty World War II is entertaining. The character of Daniels is relatively well fleshed out, though it does play to some tropes that could do with an update. The good-looking farm boy from Texas with the sweetheart at home waiting for him, and Daniels gets home in one piece without any sign of injury. I would like to see this kind of military-based game, but where the people return home with PTSD or obvious physical injuries. Because throughout this game, grenades constantly go off. There's a part where a church crumbles down around you. There's a part where Nazis shoot you down the stairs. You see numerous people die around you. Yep, the hero comes out magically unscathed in the end, with his sweetheart waiting for him. Throughout the game, you will get sudden, though predetermined, opportunities to perform what is called an heroic action. Sometimes the action is shooting on sight a Nazi soldier who is trying to personally murder one of your infantry before he can complete the deed, but sometimes it is responding to a call for help from a downed soldier and dragging him to coverage. The concept is fantastic, but the interactions need to be refined. Numerous times when I was performing the drag soldier function, I died because I kept on getting shot while being stuck around this mysterious unseen object blocking my path. I could look around and see no walls and a clear path to the intended location, identified by an on-screen signal, but for whatever reason, because I was only 4 meters away from the nearest solid object instead of 5, I kept on failing. The supply system where your infantry can carry spare ammo or medkits or point out enemies is a great feature. And the point out enemies feature is indeed a necessary one. The grey Nazi uniforms don't really stand out from the miserable backdrops of shelled cities, and sometimes they don't really stand out from those of the Allied forces either. Numerous times I started shooting at my troops because it's not like the good guys are wearing white and the bad guys are wearing black. I'm going to ask one last hard philosophical question. Did stopping Germany in Europe save more lives than having them defeat the Russian forces? This is a bit of a hard question, because while we see Hitler as the ultimate in evil unbridled, we sometimes do this at the cost of overlooking the fact that Stalin in Russia was at least as equally as brutal, and for much longer, and whose consequences are still being felt today. We also see that Russia became a superpower that rivaled the US, which kicked off the Cold War, which in itself led to an untold number of deaths, assassinations, espionage, and more. This has been Damien, the Quite Rational Gaming Dad. I hope you enjoy.